Well, I am very excited to introduce a guest I've never met in person before. In fact, this is the first time we've laid eyes on each other. We've been emailing each other back and forth, but Alison Fragale is really a unique talent, I think, in the psychology space and the business organization space. She's been a professor at UNC for 20 years. She really focuses on supporting ambitious women by giving them science-based strategies to be confident, savvy advocates for their own interests. Yesterday, I think, was the book launch of Likeable Badass, which I've already ordered for a number of my favorite people, men and women, frankly. It is a fabulous book. I was sad, actually, when it ended. She lives in Chicago. Unfortunately, she's a Steelers fan. I'm a Cowboys fan, so we're going to have to get over that. But she did go to Dartmouth, so she has a special place in my heart there. A PhD from Stanford, worked with Adam Grant. In fact, I'm sitting here preparing, jamming out my emails, and I get Adam Grant's Substack. I subscribe to his Substack, and I'm now subscribed to Alison Fragale's Substack. And 12 books to fire up your brain this fall. Number one book, Alison's book that just came out. So she is a Peloton person like me, and she loves shoes and nice wine and cheap coffee. And there's some good stories in the book about, writing the book in the coffee house. She can't do a cartwheel. I did learn that from the book, but I think some of the ideas are going to really stick with you. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd love to start with the concept of defining likable badass. And I'm not going to even try, but I'm going to ask whether in cross-examination after you define it.
Absolutely. So it's a catchy title. A lot of people are drawn to the book because of the title. But the title has a specific meaning that is rooted in psychology, which is my area of expertise. So what I help people understand is the concept of status, which is being respected by other people. And when we decide how much to respect another person, or they just make those decisions about us, those are not random judgments. They're based on two dimensions. And likable and badass are just my catchy names for those two dimensions. So the likable dimension is, do you care about other people other than yourself? Do you add value to other people? Are you pleasant to be around? Do people enjoy interacting with you? That's going to be our warm, cold dimension. So I call that likable, but it's really capturing the value that we add to other people. Then the second dimension is, are you good at getting stuff done, right? If I give you things to do, are you going to execute them well? Whether that's be at lunch on time or, win a case, whatever it is. Are you competent, organized, persistent, decisive? Do you have those qualities? And we respect those things in people too. I use badass as my catchy term for that. But that's really about the science of how we evaluate people. And when we put them together, the magic, surefire, no-fail combo is if people see you as a highly capable person that cares about people other than yourself, they will respect you. So anytime we can show up that way as a likable badass, we are doing the most controllable thing we have to influence how people see us in a positive way, in the way we want to be seen.
And why women? I mean, I know the messages resonate to any gender, but why is this particularly important for women to understand?
Yeah, I mean, a flattering question I was asked at several points as I worked on the book was this, everyone can benefit from these messages, which is true. I focus a lot on women because I'm able to speak to challenges both through my lived experience and through my expertise as a psychologist. I can bring those things together. But what we know is that status, being respected, is highly valuable to everybody. We all want it. But it's harder for some people to achieve than others because status comes from two places. One is what we call ascribed, meaning the world has deemed certain categories more worthy of respect than others. And that's where gender fits in. All other things being equal, a man will get more default respect and value than a woman. So I wrote to women because I acknowledge that this idea of being respected and valued can be harder, just like it is for people of color or for many other ascribed characteristics. But the good news, and this is like my positive, optimistic one, is that the other way we value people is how they show up and who they are. And those characteristics, those skills, the way we enter our everyday interactions can overcome and trump any different individual difference in status if we're strategic about how we do it. But that's why I root for women.
Yeah, and we'll get into that as the former president said, strategery in a bit. And I really like the way you organize the book quite a bit. But just for background for the viewers, you worked at one of the great professional service companies in the world, McKinsey, and you experienced this, before you went into academia and I assume it's before you got your PhD as well. So it's not something that's foreign to you. You're not just looking at scientific studies and extrapolating. You've actually experienced this. So I want to point that out. I've always been interested in, I've been in hiring my whole legal career, and I've always thought that women who have been, and this is an overgeneralization, but they've been involved in team sports or some team activity of some sort, really succeed better in this. Of course, I came out of law school in 1990. So, we think it's a male world now. I mean, imagine 1990 and before. So what is that? Is that a part of this likable badassness that somebody in team sports kind of gets how to fit in a group differently than somebody else?
That's a good question. I don't have a science-based answer, but as a person, a woman who played team sports myself and a psychologist, I mean, what I would say is the better able you are to put yourself in another person's head and anticipate how they're likely to see the world and then act accordingly, the better results you get. And there is a team element of that, of thinking about being able to adapt to a particular teammate's style or anticipate where they're going to be, or to recognize that in order to be successful, you actually have to be engaged in a mutual reciprocal relationship rather than you simply get to do what you want all the time. So I could definitely see that the skills that we would pick up playing sports are what they're doing in a generalizable sense is they're helping us turn our attention away from ourselves, which is where we always start, and turn it to our audience, who are the other people. And the better you can anticipate and understand your audience, then the better you can then adjust yourself in a way that gets you good results. And I think that there is a team element to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's the day I kept thinking about David Foster Wallace's graduation speech when I read sections of your book, flip the video camera, put it on somebody else's head. I love that metaphor. Before we get into a little bit more about the book, you've taught extensively and written on negotiation tactics, which we'll get to in a minute, and that gets folded into the book as well. But how did you get interested in this? Like, what's your personal journey that took you into this field?
Okay, so I always had an interest in human behavior. I thought it was fascinating. Always loved psychology. Went to Dartmouth, was a math major, didn't pursue it systematically, but every time there was an opportunity to take a class here or there, I loved them. I dabbled. Go to McKinsey. McKinsey's an interesting place to study the impact of getting in your audience's head, because I always tell people when you work in consulting, at the end of the day, it's probably not different than law, right? You have direct authority over no one. And most of the people that matter are people who have paid you. And so they think, right, you work for me. But yet you have to influence them. You have to advise them. You have to say, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. But without any authority to force your will. So what you start to do, and what I think the good consultants and probably good attorneys do, is to be able to say, okay, if this is what I think is best for you, how do I see how you see the world so that I can influence it? And the people who could empathize and understand their clients' perspectives, no one was teaching you that. It wasn't part of making the PowerPoint slides, but it was a huge determinant of success. So I started to really understand that and practice it, but didn't feel like I had any skill or training in it. It was just something I was feeling my way. How do I move these people? And so all the topics that are now part of what I study, how do you negotiate with people, influence, motivate them, what cause them to make decisions, how do they decide if they like you or don't like you, respect you or don't respect you. those all fall under the area of psychology. So as I started to get more interested in those challenges in consulting, I thought, how do I study this? And then I finally figured it out. And I said, oh, well, you can actually study organizational psychology. And so that's when I left and went to get my PhD and to try to help people answer these questions that I was answering as a consultant, but with the added lens of science, not simply trial and error, which is how a lot of us have to learn these things.
You lay it out in such an interesting way because you're basically saying, explain why I observed all these phenomena as I interacted with people who stole credit and tried to put me down or define my role lesser or put me in a position to succeed like a great mentor does. So let's talk a little bit about mentors and coaches and their place. You talk a lot about that, and I love the part about getting that mentorship relationship and advice before proverbially shots are fired, before there's a stressful situation, but before you like desperately need the mentorship. Can you talk a little bit about how to cultivate a mentor and how to use a mentor effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, I benefited so much at so many different stages of my life from people mentoring me, not just in a long-term way, but simply giving me good advice. And a lot of things, including the entire book that I wrote, wouldn't have been possible without people advising me. So one of the things I've observed a lot in relationship building, whether it's building a mentor or getting a colleague, a boss, whatever, to value your work, is people don't think about their audience until they're desperate for their audience to see them in a particular way. And so we're heads down, we're doing the work. And it's only when we're about to, or we do get feedback, like, wait a second, this person may not value me, or I need this person's help, but I don't have a relationship with them yet. That's when we're all of a sudden panicked and we're like, we need to build the relationship. And relationships are hard to build on 5 minutes notice. It's not that you can't ever do it. But so with mentoring, just like anything else, and a couple things. One is that I think most people's, when you say the word mentor, if you go into people's brains and think about what visual image that has been generated, it's normally going to be somebody who does the same job as them, but is a little bit ahead of them. And there's value in that. But one of the things that I espouse is this idea of like thinking of mentorship, like fractional mentorship. Where you have multiple imperfect mentors that can teach you lots of different things. And one of the things that we can be looking at is for people who are really good at showing up as likable badasses. So I always think first thing I would advise people to do in finding a mentor is think about people in your life that when you say the word likable badass, their name comes to mind. And then what do they do that caused you to see them that way? You came to that judgment because of something they said or did, or many little small points along the way. But what are they? And if you can pick them out by watching them, great. Or even better, have a conversation with them and say, I so admire how you add value to other people and showcase your expertise. I want to learn from you. Can we talk about how you do it and think about what lessons I can model? And that can be the start of a great mentoring relationship. So expanding our mind beyond, I want to talk to somebody who has the job I want 5 years from now, to I want to talk to a whole host of people, including some people, even if they're in a totally different industry or field, but you know what they're really good at doing is they are really good at getting the respect of their audience. And I want to figure out the couple different ways they do it, which they may not even consciously know. But if I study them and I talk to them, I can figure it out. So that's one thing I think about, but that's a longer game, right? You want to start those things before you're in some desperate reputation salvaging situation at work, and you want to call somebody up and you're like, help me. It's hard to create the mentor relationship. It's hard for them to solve your problem. So I always think the easiest time to build all of these relationships of any kind is long before you need them. So great mentorship, over time. And I think an easy way for people to do it is tell somebody that you really respect, I think you're amazing. I'd like to learn from you. Can I take you to lunch or buy you a coffee? And I want to understand your techniques. That's a hard invitation for people to turn down, because I always say everyone's favorite topic in life is themselves, and they will give you endless time to talk about themselves if they think you actually care about the answer. It's the easiest way to get somebody to give you time.
if they think you actually care about the answer. Isn't that such an important line in that? Because a mentor really wants to feel like they're helping. They don't want to feel like the person's listening and okay, they check the box of having the meeting. That's why, by the way, I think your book is fascinating around sales strategy as well. And I assume, I haven't read your stuff on that, but these concepts of small gifts and it's all part of a sales strategy. So I really want to make it my mission to help you meet one of your mentors, Michelle Obama, because at least as of the publishing of the book, you hadn't done that yet. So we'll get to work on that one. But this is a little bit of a provocative question, and maybe it's because my likable badass wife and I have been watching the morning show, which everybody had said, you need to watch. And of course, for those who don't watch the morning show, a big component is the Me Too movement. And I remember I speak a fair amount around our firm, which is global, to young lawyers about how to think about selling, how to cultivate these relationships that you describe. And I remember speaking when we had a Warsaw office, and I talked about vulnerability and how important, being vulnerable and asking for advice and things like that are in these relationships. And the women came up to me afterwards and they were very sweet and said, great job, really interesting presentation, and we're going to try to put this to use. But understand that in our culture, if we're vulnerable with an older man, that is a signal that somehow we're open to a different kind of relationship. So is there a line where, how do young women who want to take on a male mentor who's senior make sure that those boundaries are set? Or is that just, when you see it kind of stuff?
It's something you always have to be conscious of. And I think if anyone's giving you creepy vibes, go find someone else to talk to. But I go by the idea that most men want to be genuinely helpful. And but in any relationship, I do think that vulnerability and strategy can coexist, right? Lots of different ways one can be vulnerable with another human, but they don't all have to be the same every situation. So I think approaching somebody, and I think that you can do a couple of things. You can be vulnerable and acknowledge that you want to learn without deprecating yourself and saying, I'm terrible, you're great, will you help me? Saying, I really admire some things that I've seen you be able to do. I am always interested in constant learning and improvement, and I see you as a person who could help take me at the level I am now and help me be even better. And I would love to learn from you. Tell me, what's the easiest way to do that? And how do you like to advise and mentor people? Could I call you occasionally? Could we have lunch? Take their lead. But I do think that, and that's a form of vulnerability, but it's vulnerability, but also selling yourself and showcasing that you are a person that is highly capable and also wants to do this not just for your own benefit, but because your growth enables you to give more to other people, to give more to your firm, right? To give more to everybody else. And so I think it's vulnerability, authenticity, right, are beautiful things and we shouldn't abandon them, but they coexist with being purposeful and strategic. It's not either or. And so the general advice I would say is be honest, be complimentary, and tell the other person what you really value, and ask for their help in whatever way is mutually agreeable to get you to the level that you want to be. But the other thing I would also say to women as well is that there's research on allyship that people generally want to be allies to people who are in other groups, but they often do nothing because they don't know what to do. And to be an ally is vulnerable. So yes, it's vulnerable to go into the office of a senior man and say, I would like your help. And especially without it coming across as, suggesting that you want a relationship that you don't want. But it's equally vulnerable. I mean, here's the deal. If you don't do it, they're never going to come to you, because that senior man is never going to walk into the junior woman's office and say, I really think I can mentor you. They're going to be very concerned about the vulnerability there. So a couple of thoughts in general is, oftentimes it's up to the mentee to make that move because it actually is more vulnerable in the other direction. but in general, to invite allyship and to tell people, I could use your help. You're influential. Your voice can help me. That gives somebody an invitation to the party, which they may have been sitting there on the sidelines all along, privately supporting women, hoping for their success, but not knowing what they can do. So giving people an invitation always helps. And then I always tell the allies, don't wait for an invitation. If you're ever sitting there wondering, like, I could do this, would it be appreciated or not? Generally, the answer is it would be appreciated. And just to do it. And then say to a person, I didn't ask, I just did it. And I did it because I think you're amazing and I want the whole world to know it. No one's going to get mad at that. So jump in.
Yeah, no, it's why I think your pendulum has both assertiveness and warmth, because the vulnerability comes with, I remember the book, I can't remember the author, but Radical Candor, where, a compliment or criticism is so much more effective if it's highly specific.
Kim Scott, yes.
Yes,
Amazing.
thank you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you do this, when you're the mentor or the mentee, the ally, or the person needing support, and you do it in the idea of, I have things I want to share and I want to do it as a gift, to help, it's a offering that people say yes to and they appreciate.
Okay, so shifting gears, you've got at least 4 limiting mindsets. So things that are blockers to being a likable badass, to being assertive and warm. I'm an imposter. Boy, I don't want to be one of those people that seeks status. This is your smuggling versus sleuthing piece. I don't really care about what other people think about me, which is an interesting one I want to dive into. And then I don't have time for this. Talk a little bit about why you had those as the limiting mindsets, and kind of if you could give a little bit of an overview of why it's a blocker to moving in an organization or in a relationship.
Yeah. So my general piece of advice is that you need to be acting in ways that will get people to respect your value long before you need them to respect your value. If you wait until they're necessary, you just don't have time to influence their psychology. So people have the luxuries. I have people, I know so many people that work tremendously hard and they're not doing simple things that they could be doing that would be getting them a lot more goodwill with their audience, which is ironic given they're working 100-hour weeks. And I would think you could take 30 of those minutes and invest it in relationship building that would pay off dividends, way more than, dozens of those hours that you worked. And so why aren't they doing it? And these are the common ones that I've heard myself say at times. They've kind of been inner monologues. I hear other people say in their own words, and they hold us back. And so what they do is they cause us to ignore relationships until we really need them. Then we can't influence them. And if they're not going the way we want, we're desperate. It's too late. So these limiting mindsets, what they do is they serve as excuses to kind of just ignore our relationships right now, because we'll just push it down the road. And I find that really problematic because it's really easy and fun to build relationships when you don't need, and really hard and stressful when you do. Like, I always think about job search as an example. If you're in a bad situation at work and you're desperate for job searching, the whole idea of networking and talking to people seems so awful, because you're like, either going to think of using them and I need them for things. And when you're not job searching, going to events and talking to people is very fun because you don't need anything. So anyway, so those limiting mindsets are really things that stand in our way of building our relationships when we don't need them, so that when we do need them, they're there for us.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's because, I think about the sports metaphors. My son has actually gone into performance psychology and went to the University of Edinburgh to get that master's. And so is in your adjacent space. It's very fun to talk to him about his work. But, it's the classic, if you need to hit the walk-off home run, if you try to hit a home run, you're never going to hit a home run. Like, you've got to keep it simple. So if you try to pitch business to a client because it's 6 months left in the year, and if you don't get your numbers, you're going to get paid less, that's probably not a very compelling reason for the client to hire you. Establish that relationship earlier.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that when we think about that, we would all recognize that I can't call a client and say, I need to hit my quota. Will you hire me? Because nobody's going to sign up for that. So even if that was why, we would never use that argument. We would be thinking about, well, if I want to sell my client, what's the pitch I'm going to make that's going to actually resonate with them? We would be putting ourselves in the client's head. When we're in sales, we do that. When we are selling ourselves, which we're doing all the time, we're not as good as putting ourselves in other people's heads. We have this much more like, and this is why I'm pro authenticity. Don't get me wrong, but authenticity without strategy is not my favorite. This idea of I am who I am. I do what I want. If you don't like it, hell with you, is not a very effective approach to life. And I hear versions of that of people at all ages. And I always say you would never do that in a sales context. You would never say, I'm selling what I'm selling. And if you don't like it, forget it. You would say, I need to sell this. It's important to me. If people don't buy this, I don't survive. So they need to buy it, but I need to talk about it in a way that's going to help them understand the benefits they get from it. And that's what we have to do when we think about selling us in relationships. If they don't buy it, we don't survive. But we have to talk about our product, us, in a way that helps people understand the benefit that they get from it.
Yes. And it's just the results. If we're so outcome dependent, we end up getting stressed about the result while we're selling, which makes us less authentic, right?
100%. And the strategies that we're using often come across as strategies because people recognize we really need them. So It starts to feel very used car, as opposed to the same strategy when you don't need somebody is very natural and authentic.
For all of those prospective mentors out there, allies, you tell a story about, you state the proposition that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And then you tell a story that was personal to you, anonymizing the guy you were working with. But essentially, it's the concept of how you learned from a situation where your role was kind of relegated and he took credit for things that you actually probably did. Can you go through that a little bit from both perspectives, from the perspective of how you would avoid that situation and how an ally who really means well can avoid that situation from occurring if they have good intent?
Yeah, in my situation, it was I got put on the team with somebody who I didn't think was very likable or badass. They weren't very capable and they weren't very caring, but everyone else really respected and adored this person. I heard great things about them before I started working with them. Only when I started working with them, realized I don't agree with any of this. So it was doubly infuriating to have a situation where somebody was so incompetent and cruel to me while also leveraging this halo across the organization. So a couple of things. The one thing I always talk about that I learned from it is, and hell, let me step back. And then what I ultimately later learned was the reason that he had such a good brand was that he just told people how awesome he was all the time, and they believed him. And I said I learned a couple things from that. One was I learned about the power of storytelling. I thought there's no actual talent here, and yet if storytelling alone can get you an amazing brand, imagine what storytelling can do when it's coupled with actual talent, right? And capability. And so rather than make me be disgusted by self-promotion, what it actually taught me was how powerful it was and to really embrace it. But I would say if you're in a situation like that, I do think the idea of allies, like I'm very junior. I have no brand. I have no status yet. But to think about building your status very broadly from the get-go, meeting people from day one in an organization, not just the people you report up through and work with, but all the other people, in the organization, adding value to anyone you can. And that was something that I realized very early. Anyone can be an ally. They don't have to be your boss. And a lot of times the most influential people with your boss are not you, but they're the allies in other parts of the organization who have the respect of your boss. And they can then come and speak on your behalf and be promoters for you. So one thing I would say to people who are junior in this situation is the way you don't become vulnerable to a single bad egg is you have a broad network and you start adding value to that network as early and broadly as you can so that when one relationship doesn't work out, because that's guaranteed to happen, you have other people who can vouch for you, or also other places you can go where people see your value. And I think asking people explicitly to advocate for you is something that most people underutilize, where we feel like every fight we have is a fight we have to have ourselves. I'm in this situation, this person doesn't value me. What can I do? How can I show up differently? What can I say to them? I'm like, those are all good things. You should think about that. But the question I always say to people is, who does this person respect who also respects you? That person is your agent in changing this person's mind. And one of the things you may need to do is ask the agent. This is where mentors can be really useful, or sponsors, is, can you help make this person aware of my good work? Because they either don't know it's happening and I can't tell them, or they're undervaluing and underappreciating it. But I know your words will be more influential than my words, because when I talk myself up, they're going to discount it. But when you talk me up, they'll believe you. So that's where, and that's also where I think allies can come in, is if you see somebody whose work you really value, start telling people that work is amazing. And particularly if you think they're undervaluing it, then say it twice as loud and twice as often. And that's a beautiful form of allyship. You don't have to wait for permission, and you don't have to become that person's lifetime mentor. You just have to amplify their work. Like, by the way, everybody, pay attention over here. Do we see like what that great work product is in the corner that no one's talking about because that person's not bragging on themselves? You can do that. And it also creates a lot of great reciprocity, because when you do that for other people, they want to then turn around and do it for you.
Yeah. And back to your initial point, if you've got to hand somebody a script to go be your ally and tell people how wonderful you are, it's not as effective as if they've really gotten to know you and shots aren't being fired. They get your mojo. And then you say, by the way, I did accomplish this. I just wanted you to know that. And, it'd be great if you could let folks know, because I feel that it's not my place to, or whatever. But you do get into, and I want to get into that in 1 second, but I want to frame it better than that. But your narrative, right? And I love this section of the book. I think, in so many ways for mental health, it's important to understand how much we control our narrative, both internally and externally. Whether it's the Eckhart Tolle more philosophical approach, Viktor Frankl, you control what's going on between your two ears, or your very interesting science-based approach to cultivating a resume. And I use the air quotes when I say resume, because what you're really using a mentor for here is helping you co-create the story of your career. So talk a little bit about that. I don't want to butcher it too much. Talk about, how you work with a mentor on that, and how important it is to create your own narrative about your career.
Yeah. So as I said, the way I think about this, everything that everybody knows about you at this point in time came from only one of two places. It came from you. So it's either they've watched your videos, they've interacted with you, they read something you wrote online, they follow you on social media, something you directly put out into the world, and they've seen it and they've drawn a conclusion based on it. That's you. And the other channel that people learn from you is things that other people have said about you while you're not around. And those are the two channels that we learn about people. So we have to do the best we can to control both of those. So one is to be aware and to think about, what are all the signals I'm sending out? On you don't get to decide what people pay attention to or not. As I tell my kids, right? Like, your social media post about spring break gets to have just as much weight in somebody's brain as the PowerPoint presentation you just put on their desk. You don't get to tell them that they should discount one and not the other. It's all part of the story. So you got to control that channel in a way that, again, is authentic and strategic. But then on the mentor one, it's really about controlling that second piece, which people don't think about as much. Everyone has learned, whether or not they do a good job of it, that I should present myself in ways that build my status. That, is known. But this idea that I should be using other people to help build my status for me is less discussed. And so when we think about mentorship, we think about, and sponsorship, right? This idea that what can these people do for us is sometimes they can be our agents to be that other pathway to building status. So a lot of times, how did you and I meet? We met through an introduction because we know the same wonderful person. And I say, when those things happen, it happens to you a lot, happens to me a lot. When someone introduces you and says, Craig's amazing, Alison's amazing, you should know each other, right? When we enter a relationship, we don't enter as complete strangers on an airplane. We already enter with some status in each other's eyes. Why? Because that third person who we both respect said, you two will enjoy each other. And so when someone brings you together in that way, right, it's an immediate status boost. So there's a couple, again, back to allyship is do it without people asking. But the other thought is ask people more often. And you're only going to ask people who think highly of you to begin with, where you already earned the respect. But I do think, Brene Brown, who says a lot of brilliant things, one of the things I always remember is clear is kind. If someone comes to you with a very specific request, I think about this in the context a lot of my marriage and the typical spousal jokes of like, if you wanted me to empty the dishwasher, couldn't you just say empty the dishwasher? Do you have to go around with all these cryptic things about like, why don't we have any clean dishes? And, just say, could you do X by this time? It would be so much easier. People love that clarity. Clear is kind. If I know you want something from me and it'll make you happy, just like in a spousal negotiation, I'm so relieved when someone says, you doing X, I'll be thrilled. And you're like, oh my God, that's all it takes for you to be happy? Excellent. I'm on it. Dishwasher empty. It's the same with our mentors. If somebody says, what would have tremendous value to me is for you to attend this next meeting. And for you, when the subject of X is brought up, which we tend to get a lot of criticism about, you seem supportive. Could you actually voice your support in the meeting at a moment that feels right to you? And now all of a sudden you're like, I've got real clarity. I know exactly what I'm needed to do. Go to the meeting and say something positive when subject X comes up. On it. I'm happy. I can make you happy. And so when we offer that clarity to our mentors and say, here's what I really need, it's appreciated on both sides. We get more of the sponsorship and mentorship we want. And that person is happy because they don't have to sit around thinking at night how they're supposed to mentor us. No one has time for that. When you give them clear direction, they're better and they're happier for it because they know they've helped you.
Yeah. And you skimmed over it a little bit, but I don't want you to be too humble because your book, yes, it is about being a likable badass in the workplace, but it is also about exactly what you talk about, being a great spouse, being a great parent, being a better child, a better friend. It's the Brene Brown, I only have 20% right now. I get it. If you can't be 80, that clear as kind statement should be framed because it is so much easier than passive aggressive. You're asserting yourself by asking for the help you need. And you talk about a storytelling audit and working. I always think about it as, whether it's a coach or you give somebody nagging rights or whatever. But talk a little bit about what it means, a storytelling audit, and how, for example, you actually specifically frame your career. I mean, part of what I love, like you say, give your retirement speech your first day of work. Like, what do you hope people say at your retirement speech, which is a little this Tom Peters, begin with the end in mind. I love that. So talk about that audit and.
Yeah, so if we go back to the two channels of how people learn about you, the information you put out in the world and the information others put out, we often have no idea what information we're putting out in the world because so much of our storytelling is done by our non-conscious brain. So if I say to you, how many cups of coffee did you have yesterday? You'll probably be able to give me a fairly accurate answer. But if I say, how many times yesterday did you deflect a compliment? Did you put yourself down when there was no need? You'd be like, I don't know. I have no idea. Why? Because your brain it's not recording those things. It's on autopilot. And so you can't tell a strong story if you don't know what story you're telling. So the audit is simply, why don't you turn your conscious attention to your behaviors so that you can become more aware of what signals you're putting out in the world. So I do this with women all the time when they say, basically, I'm doing great work, I'm not getting great credit. I'm like, okay, well, let's analyze this. Like, let's talk about what you're doing minute by minute during the day so we can start to see where there are opportunities I take it as a given you're doing great work, but how do we get you more recognition, more credit? And we all find, and I report on my own on it, that a lot of times what we are doing, our own behaviors are taking credit away from ourselves because we are downgrading, downplaying, the things that we are doing for no good reason. So that's the audit, is let's just start with awareness of what is my baseline story. So then the second step is, would I be advantaged by changing my story, how I show up in the world, eliminating bad habits, putting better things in, whatever it is. But that starts with taking your non-conscious storytelling and making you aware of it. And that in itself is the first step to deciding, how do you want to grow? How do you want to change?
Is that humility an effort to protect ourselves from, and false humility, I should say, to protect ourselves from the person who might be looking from the side going, why is Alison taking all the credit for that? Or why is Alison bragging? Or, how do we deal with that emotion that we don't want to come off as inauthentic because we're pushing our own agenda?
Yeah, the idea is we value the likable dimension. We want to be likable. We want to be seen as warm. We don't want to be seen as bragging or self-centered, egotistical. And we shouldn't want to be those things. They're not good things. So, but sometimes we have a good goal. I want you to like me, and we use a bad strategy. Oh, okay. I'm going to put myself down. And you think about it. When I put myself down, you might like me more, but at the expense of you thinking that I'm badass, that I'm capable. And I think that really wasn't very effective, because at best, if you did get a boost in likability, you did so at the expense of your badassery. But you didn't have to do that because there were other ways. Wouldn't it be much more effective to just give you a compliment? You would like me, but I haven't done anything to diminish my own capability. So I always think there's something equally authentic that you could do that doesn't cut yourself down or take away from your own success. And so when it comes to, you asked specifically about talking up your accomplishments. There's a logic, right? If I don't tell you if I brag about my good things, you might think I'm boastful. So therefore, I won't brag about my good things. I'll keep them to myself. And therefore, there's no risk that you'll see me as boastful. Okay, that's a logic. The problem is the logic isn't supported by the science, because what happens is, if you have a success to share, you win a case, you get promoted, you win an award, whatever it is, and you don't tell people, they're eventually going to find out. The communication grapevine in 2024 is just too efficient. So when they find out that something good happened to you and you didn't tell them, they don't think, oh my gosh, how humble to keep that to himself. They either think, I'm not as really close with Craig, otherwise he would have told me. Or, why didn't Craig tell me? Does he think that I'm so pathetic that I couldn't be happy? I'd be envious. I can't handle it. Well, that's not a favorable thing to think. So the research shows that when we hide our successes, we actually don't even get credit for being humble. We're seen as evasive. We're seen as not, caring about the relationship. So it's actually a terrible strategy. So I tell people, you're better off sharing your success and then expressing gratitude for other people who contributed to it, right? So I have a book releasing. People congratulate you, and there's this tendency where it all feels uncomfortable of no, it's no big deal, put it down. I just, I don't want to even be in the spotlight. I don't, you're just kind of batting all the compliments down. And it's not a thing that people want to give you these gifts. They want to support you, and you don't have to say, oh my God, writing a book. It's so amazing. So few people can do it. Yes, I'm such a, no, but to say, I'm having a tremendous amount of fun with it. I've met so many new people that I'm able to have these amazing conversations with and help. And it was such a great vehicle. So thank you. I enjoyed it. And I appreciate that you're taking the time to acknowledge it. So those things, try to help people coexist, tell your story, but then thank the person for celebrating it. Tell people what you're grateful for. Tell people how you it's going to help you make a bigger contribution. Focus on the caring and likable piece in a different way, not simply withholding the information, because that's not the only way that you can be likable. So when you share your success and then lift other people up or give other people credit, you can get both at the same time. So it's one of the big things I try to coach people on, is to go from the mentality of, I'm either nice or I'm successful. I can't be both. It's like, no, you can be both, but it sometimes requires a slightly different tweak on your strategy. Don't hide your success, share it, and thank other people at the same time. That's both, whereas hiding it is neither.
No, I love it. I mean, it reminds me of a gold in my ear. I don't know if you know the story, but in the during I think it was the '73 war, she was having a general in front to talk about the victory, and he was like, "Well, it wasn't me, and I had all this help, and da da da." And she apparently takes her high heel off. She had those big, thick heels, and she pounded it on the table in front of her, and she said, "General, you're not good enough to be that humble."
Right? Exactly. So this like it's a very subtle line between when someone compliments you, be like, I didn't do anything, it was all them, and versus thank you. I worked very hard and I also was very privileged to have the support of persons A, B, and C who worked equally hard to make this happen. And for that, I am grateful to work with amazing people. That is just a slight tweak on the same thing, but totally changes the messaging where you don't have to give up your own credit to shine a light on somebody else.
So I don't want to run out of time, and there's so many things I still want to cover. There's so many good stories in here. The Stacey Abrams story you tell. I mean, this book is so good. I will pay you that compliment because I think it's gonna be a huge hit. But I guess I want to talk a little bit about the negotiation strategy. But what I found interesting is how you relate it to child rearing. So talk a little bit about, because I'm definitely the guy who didn't really want to get in the pool with the kids either. So talk a little bit about being a first mover, presenting three options, talk a little bit about, give a primer so that folks understand what's in this book about negotiation.
Yeah. So I always tell people when it comes to work, start with what you would do as a parent, because people's parenting instincts, I always feel are better than their leadership instincts. And it's true with this too, right? Harris have been saying, I'm going to give you three choices since the dawn of time. And it's always, what's the purpose of giving a kid a choice, right? Do you want to take your bath first? Do you want to eat your vegetables first? Or do you want to do your homework first? It's like all three are getting done. But by giving you choice, what am I doing? I'm trying to build the relationship. I'm trying to show you that I'm not forcing my will. I care about you. I care about your autonomy. I care about your preferences. So giving people choices communicates that, while also still making sure that your needs are met. This is a negotiation technique that's underutilized, of presenting multiple options at the same time. People tend to negotiate sequentially. How about this deal? No. How about this deal? So simultaneously is, I could see three different resolutions that would meet our needs, A, B, and C. Do you like any of them? And when you do that, it's no different than presenting your kid three vegetables or three different orders of operations for the evening. It's saying, I'm flexible. I want you to have an outcome that you like, but it's done with purpose and intent so that whichever one you pick, I still am getting something I want. And even if somebody, in the context of a professional negotiation, sometimes people won't pick one. They'll say none of them are good enough. At least you can then start the conversation there and say, okay, well, at least pick which one you want to use as the basis for our subsequent negotiations. And we can start from whichever one you want. You're still giving them a choice. So that's an example of how we can bring negotiation techniques that are going to allow us to do something that people, but particularly women, have felt really hard, is that there's a real tension between badass and likable when it comes to advocating for yourself, asking for what you want. As soon as I'm too assertive, people don't like me. But if I try to be too accommodating, people like me and I don't get what I want. And so what I give people is tools that have been shown in the negotiation literature to help you get more of both. Three offers at the same time is one. And then you were talking about getting in the pool. I tell the story that, there are some parents who like to swim with their kids, and I am just not one of those parents. And I always joke that I had three kids only for one reason, so they could swim with each other in the pool. And I just not a parent that likes to play pool games, and they just got to figure that out, which I think we generally have at this point, but it's taken, a decade plus. But rather than sit there feeling guilty where they're nagging me, I started realizing I need to be a first mover in this negotiation. So knowing that I was going to the pool, I can't just sit there with my magazine and then they're like, keep asking me. I think about, okay, what are things I can do that will get them to play without me having to get in the pool? So I'd get on my phone and I'd look up a couple different games where either I could be the referee from the lawn chair or they could play by themselves. I'm like, hey guys, I've got 3 great pool games. Want to see if you guys want to play any of them today. And it was a much better strategy for getting them to like me while still also doing what I needed them to do. So I think, as I said, parenting instincts brought into the workplace are always a great place to start. But this idea that, yes, with the right tools, it is possible for you to be a strong advocate for what you want without the person at the other end liking you less because of it.
Yeah. And I like the bravery of saying, do you like any of those options? Right. I mean, I've been in hundreds of mediations, and rarely do you see the lawyer say, here's a solution. What do you think how close is that to your best and final? Because you just assume there are going to be too many games played, but actually you're getting data. You're being a first mover to elicit data that'll help solve the problem. It did frustrate me because a couple things. One, I wish I was younger than you, so I could have learned from you and gone to business school and heard you, because I imagine you are an amazing professor. And 2, I could have used that parenting tip because I never quite thought ahead on like researching the games and stuff like that. So quit bragging about that. But I loved the way I called my wife about this before the podcast. I said, honey, I think we've done a good job, because Alison and my rocking chair goal, at least one of them is the same, which is not necessarily to always be a parent to your kids, but to be their buddy. And I've got 29, 25, and 21-year-old kids. And so we go to sporting events together and go to concerts together. But talk about why that's important to think about your retirement strat, to what you want people to say. This reminds me of David Brooks's, resume virtues versus Adam 1, Adam 2 virtues, where he says your eulogy virtues that he describes.
Yeah, I think the way I talk about it is, status being respected is a resource, just like health is a resource, just like money is a resource. These things don't have value in themselves. They have value because they help you do other things that you care about. So, well, what do we care about? And I think that the tendency in our professional lives is I deal with very successful, accomplished, hard-charging, ambitious people who are used to working lots of hours and thinking, if I'm not getting what I want, I'll just work harder and longer and I'll figure it out. And a lot of times I think I use the graphic of a cat with like a feather dangling in front of it. And they just keep dangling the feather further and further, and the cat keeps chasing it and batting at it and never gets it. And I think about the analogy of completing like a marathon or an endurance event where you're actually competitive, not just crossing the finish line, but you're competitive. You're or an Olympic athlete, right? So you think about an Olympic marathon runner. I have not done that. I've run one marathon in my life. It was horrible. I'll never do it again. But I did it. I could check it off the list. But I would imagine if I was ever going to do this insanity more than once, you don't get faster as a runner by waking up today and being like, okay, I ran this fast yesterday. I'm just going to run faster today. And then I'm just going to run faster. And then I'm just going to run faster. And then eventually I'll be a world record marathon holder. That's not how marathon people do it. They say, okay, my goal is to, whatever it is, qualify for the Olympics, break the world record time, etc. All right, well, let me work backward. If that's my end goal, what does my training need to look like? 6 months in advance, a year in advance. It's not just run faster every day. It's thinking about, sometimes I'm doing strength. Sometimes I'm running slowly, but for longer. Sometimes I'm sprinting, but only for 15 minutes. So you're putting together a training plan with the end in mind, and you're starting to create the building blocks. I want to take that analogy and bring it into how we think about managing our lives and our careers, which is, let's start with an end state that we see as desirable. I don't want to be a world record marathon holder, but what do I want? I get to define my own desired end state that I'm working toward. And then with that vision in mind, I can use it to make decisions today about how I build my status and how I spend my status. So for example, the relationships that I might most need in my life may not be the ones you need, because I'm not trying to achieve the same things. I have no aspiration to be a politician, but if I want to be a politician, I would need a certain kind of network to support my goals. But if I want to be a women's advocate, I need a different kind of network to support my goals. So figuring out what the goals are helps you figure out, who do I need to build my status with, most importantly, if I can't do it with everyone. And then, what am I going to spend my status on? What am I going to use the respect that I have cultivated in these relationships to achieve? to achieve for other people, to achieve for my own success. So I talk about a couple different mental exercises that can help you think about what your desired end is, and you get to write that end. And then to start to think about how do you use that desired end to work backward to today to make the hard choices that we have to make. What relationships do I invest in? Do I speak up in a relationship where something isn't going right? Or do I keep my mouth shut? Those are hard decisions. And, in the case of the back to the parenting and stuff, I have a very, I have always, ever since I was envisioning having young kids, I noticed that people cared about things that I didn't care about, because I always had this very long game that I wanted to have strong relationships with my adult children. And I cared a lot about that. But that has informed a lot of my decision making and what I use my status for and not. But what that did me was things like a lot of my friends, when our kids were young, they didn't want to have jobs where they had to travel because they were very concerned about missing their kids' firsts. And I said, like, if your kid is developing at a predicted rate, all these firsts are going to happen to all of them. Like, they're all going to walk and talk and those things and roll over. And so I didn't feel like not building my status in relationships so I could see those things was particularly important, because to me, my end goal, my rocking chair was, do my grown kids like being around me? And I thought, I don't know if they will or they won't, but it's not going to be because I like heard their first word or I saw their first step. So I'm going back to work, and someone can tell me what those things were and take a video of it. We live in the world of, constant video. So let me send it to me. And that was an easy decision for me, but only because I had identified this very clear defining goal that I didn't have to agonize over some of the things that were happening when they were little. Now my kids are currently between 9 and 15, my 3. And so now it's starting to be a lot more how I show up in these interactions. You're going to remember this. And this could have an impact on how we are 15 years from now. And it's changing the way I'm interacting with my career, interacting with them. But it all started with the idea of defining the goal, as opposed to, I just get up and I'm the best parent I can be today, and I'm the best parent I can be tomorrow. And then at the end, I either like my results or I don't. And so again, that doesn't have to be everyone's goal. But the idea of whatever you can choose with purpose is going to then give you a lot more confidence in today's moment of, do I or don't I? And I felt, when I had a parent of young kids, I had a lot of confidence in what I was doing. And I only had that confidence because I had that longer term goal. I think if I did, I would have been wrought with guilt and uncertainty at every single moment of having to leave my kids.
Yeah, and it lets you divorce from the outcome a little bit. I mean, it's the same thread as, a mentorship opportunity or going to a pitch or anything else. If you are focused on the process of giving a gift or creating value for somebody or whatever, if they choose not to go that direction, and our kids are going to go, as in a million different ways, and they're not going to be the same. And at some point you have to say kaddish over the outcome, because it's their deal. No, I love it. Okay, I've got a few quick hitter questions, and I'm not going to steal any more of your time because I know how busy you are. Adam Grant is a thought collaborator of yours. You talk about him in the book. By the way, this is completely unfair. You and I haven't rehearsed any of this, but I'm going to go for it anyway because you were magna cum laude at Dartmouth. What is your think again, to reference to Adam Grant's more recent book? I think he's got one coming now, but what is your think again moment when you did the research for this book? This was the concept that you're like, whoa, this wasn't what I was expecting to find. Was there any moment like that in preparing for the book? Told you it was completely unfair.
I'll give two answers. I mean, one is there's some research that came out that I just thought, wow, that was really cool. One was this idea of hiding successes, that it backfires. So once it was said, I'm like, oh, it makes sense. But when I thought it, I'm like, that explains so much. Humor bragging was something that came out just as I was finishing the book, of this idea of self-promoting while also using non-self-deprecating humor as a really useful technique. That was an aha for me. And I thought, as someone who really likes using humor to disarm, gave me a strategy for thinking about using it more intelligently. But then really what surprised me the most wasn't from the academic research, because I'm so immersed in that all the time. What surprised me was when I was talking to a very diverse array of women, both in my career, but then also in prep for this book, of the individual things that women would do day in and day out that were highly effective for earning them respect. It was their unique way to do it. And they were brilliantly applying the science in a way that I hadn't thought about. So one example I'll give was my now friend that I met in an airport bar, who is brilliant at using her out of office email to build her status. And it had never occurred to me that setting your out of office could be a tool by which one could earn respect, until I saw her brilliant out of office emails that she wrote. And I thought, isn't that the smartest thing I've ever seen? And in a lifetime of studying these things, I would have never been able to come up with that if I hadn't observed another woman do it. So the biggest ahas for me in the book were the individual behaviors that people were doing that had total basis in science. And they didn't know the science and I didn't know the behavior. But when I brought it together, I thought, oh my God, that's brilliant. I want everyone else to know that they could do that too.
What a great answer. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't disappoint. Second, you put some books in the back of this book, books you rely on. Can't use any of those. What is a book that it's like, it could be a book of fiction or it could be historical or whatever, but what's like a gemstone book for you that kind of defines you a bit and put you on a path maybe?
Okay. I've given this one, I repeat it a lot because I do love it. I love Cal Newport's work, not just because he's another Dartmouth.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Deep work.
Deep work was really transformational for me, both introducing me to Cal and his thinking, but also for my own work. And here's what I would say about it. I always talk about it like this. Cal's work, he does not write for women specifically, but his work is critically important for women, because this whole idea of being able to do what you want on your own schedule, work deeply without distraction, that is a privilege that not everyone gets, because some people, women included, are saddled with more non-promotable work, office housework. They get asked to do more things. They carry more burdens at home. So the idea of working deeply is a luxury that not everyone is given. And so I think that work has tremendous gender implications, even though Cal doesn't write it in that lens. So I love books that give you a bunch of ahas you remember 5 years later, but you can read them in one long airplane trip. And Deep Work is that book, right? You can, you go coast to coast and take it in your bag. You'll read the whole thing by the time you're back. And it's been really transformational for me to think about it. So I always recommend his work.
I like it. Well, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I have a million more questions, but we'll have to save it for your next book.
As I say, I'll write another book so you'll have me back.
You have to. You are really gifted, and I mean that. I read a lot of, as you can tell, I read these books, and yours is uniquely good. I recommend it to everybody, and it is it's easy to understand some pretty complicated points. I mean, you do a great job of writing it, and I know you thank your editors. You have great editors and great people contributing to it. And you also talk about a lot of topics we didn't cover, and one of them is giving gifts to people. And you've given me the honor of your time, and I so appreciate it. I know you're a speaker. You're now an author of a book, and I look forward to seeing all the great things you do in the future, Al. Thank you.